Former U.S. President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to all 37 federal charges in Miami this hour. And here's a live look outside that federal courthouse with supporters of Donald Trump. Now, Trump is facing charges in a historical criminal case, felony charges ranging from the willful retention of national defense information to conspiracy to obstruct justice. Trump is accused of showing those documents to visitors, displaying them, and then trying to hide them from investigators who demanded them back. Prosecutors say the information he held could have jeopardized national security if exposed. His defense team is insisting he has done nothing wrong, suggesting he's being persecuted for political purposes instead. Now, the indictment, which was unsealed last week and claims Trump outright refused to return the documents, sets up a criminal case which could lead to significant time in prison. And Donald Trump pleading not guilty in Miami courthouse today. We're joined now by Chris Burkett, international lawyer, for some perspective on what all of this means. Chris, good to have you in. Thank you. So I guess first off, let's start with the fact that now we know that he has pleaded not guilty to all 37 of these charges. Right. Are you surprised by that?
No, that was expected. Like you said, these penalties that go along with these charges can be absolutely severe, 20 years in prison for each of the obstruction charges. So there's no doubt he was going to be pleading guilty today, along with his co-defendant, Mr. Nada.
So now what happens? Now that he's pleaded guilty, what are the next steps?
So that will now allow for the process to begin, which is likely going to be a jury trial. Jack Smith, the prosecutor, called for a speedy trial, so they're going to try to move things along in an efficient way. And there's obviously the intersection with politics and a 2024 election coming up, and Mr. Trump being the leading Republican contender, which adds a whole nother layer of trying to resolve this more quickly. So the next step will be a series of preliminary motions, likely brought by Mr. Trump's team. They're going to try to challenge the constitutionality of the charges, to say this was an ex-president who should be allowed to retain some of these documents, and they're going to have a number of fights in court on these preliminary matters and then set a trial date, pick a jury, et cetera.
And it's funny because, I mean, I was speaking with another lawyer earlier, and you're not a political strategist by any means, but they're kind of intertwining now, politics and law.
You can't really separate when a former president and leading contender for one of the major parties is indicted. Politics and law, as often is the case, intersect and it's hard to pull them apart.
Because I'm assuming a quick, speedy trial would be preferred by the former president because of the run that he's going to take again at the next presidential election. You
might think that, but another argument one could make is that this is bringing him a lot of attention. He's raising a lot of money off the back of this, so potentially the longer he can draw it out and be seen as he's going to try to portray himself as sort of a victim of the deep state, of unfair application of the laws in order to stop him from running. All of those things play into his hand as he tries to run. If he goes to trial and is convicted, I think that's actually going to be harmful for him. He goes to trial, he's acquitted. I think that would be a huge boost. So lots of unknowns.
Okay, very interesting how it could go maybe one of two ways.
Yeah, for sure.
We've talked before, I think also, this is the second indictment in 2 months, really, for the former president. We've talked before about what he says on social media. I'm not sure if you know, we were maybe expecting to hear orders from the judge today about what he can say publicly before his trial and what he can't. I'm not sure if you know any more about that.
No, I think there's bits and pieces coming out. It's a closed court, and no one is allowed to have electronic devices, so we're not getting the live updates. I did hear that the judge, one report was that the judge had indicated that he and his co-defendant were ordered not to be in contact and discussing, despite the fact they arrived at court together today. But no, so the issues that are going to be decided haven't been revealed just yet.
I did want to ask about that too, what you mentioned, no cameras, no, there's a lot of restrictions in terms of what could be in that courtroom today, no live reporting outside the courtroom. Usually, that's normal in Canada, but usually in American courtrooms, a lot more can be recorded.
Yeah.
Is that interesting to you today that those rules were set up?
It is, in a way. It's just a different level. So this is because this is a federal court matter, and it was brought by a special prosecutor from the Department of Justice. Those rules apply, and they're more strict, as opposed to the state rules that we may have seen, the O.J. Simpson trial, where every moment was televised. A federal prosecution like this has much stricter rules.
Okay. Can you explain, too, I mean, when we're talking about these charges, these are incredibly serious charges under the Espionage Act.
Yeah.
But For people who might have been watching, this is not totally unusual for a president or former president or even vice president to take documents from the White House. But what's different about this?
Sure. A few things. I think in some cases it's the classification level. So these were marked, some of them top secret, some of them had the highest level of classification. And under the law, they are to be retained by the National Archives and are the property of the U.S. government as of noon on the day that Mr. Trump was no longer president. So there's a few things that are unique and quite distinct from other cases where this president retained material that was marked top secret, that included nuclear capabilities of the United States, that included attack plans on foreign countries, included weaknesses and vulnerabilities to attack in the U.S. in response. So highly sensitive documents that could endanger the national security of the United States and could endanger their allies, because these were documents that some of them marked only for the Five Eyes, which is the U.S.'s most trusted allies. So these were highly classified documents that fall far outside the normal course. And the fact that they were retained in such a haphazard way, kept at his resort, which is a club where had many people visiting, some kept in bathrooms, there were photos of them spilled. Then there's video of him showing them, in some cases, to supporters and to advisors. So this is not in the normal course. And in fact, as the prosecutor said, potentially put American lives at risk.
And just lastly, I want to ask you too about the judge, because there has been some issues of impartiality with this because of the judge who is overseeing this. She was appointed, I believe, by Donald Trump to the position that she's in.
That's right.
Do you think, just as someone who knows a lot, is an expertise in law, but is an outside viewer into this, do you think that's going to be an issue? Are you concerned about that?
I think this is one of those things that on the face of it looks problematic. This is a Trump appointee, and then I think one extra layer is that she already presided over an earlier motion related to these documents, and her decision was criticized by an appeals court that ultimately overturned her. So I think there's definitely some questions. Apparently, according to the Florida and the process, she was randomly selected through the normal course. So I think the question of her and whether there's a reasonable apprehension of bias based on the earlier case and the fact that she's a Trump appointee, that'll be something that may be litigated at some point. So definitely problematic, but not necessarily disqualifying.
Okay, and again, we were looking at live shots of that federal courthouse with the supporters outside. So the story not over yet, but no. Chris, I'll let you go. Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it. It's
Lindsay.
Good to see you.
You too.
That's Chris Burkett, international lawyer.